Jessica Parker always trusted her instincts, but that night, something felt undeniably off. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and her husband, Ryan, had told her he'd be working late. Jessica didn't question it. Ryan was dependable, predictable, a man who never strayed from routine. But as she sat curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a photo appeared in her social media feed that stopped her cold. It was a group selfie from her best friend, Emily, taken just a few hours earlier. Emily had captioned it, "Late night fun!" And in the background, Jessica caught a glimpse of Ryan's unmistakable leather jacket hanging on the back of a chair. Jessica stared at the photo, her heart thundering in her chest. The bar was across town, nowhere near Ryan's office. Why was his jacket there? Grabbing her keys, Jessica drove straight to the bar, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe he'd stopped by for a drink after work. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. But as she parked her car and walked toward the dimly lit entrance, her instincts screamed otherwise. Inside, the crowd was loud, the air thick with laughter and clinking glasses. Jessica spotted Emily almost immediately, seated in a corner booth. Her stomach sank as she noticed Ryan sitting beside her, his arm draped casually across the back of the booth. They were leaning in close, talking in hushed tones, oblivious to the world around them. Jessica froze, unsure of what to do next. Should she confront them here, in the middle of the crowded bar? Or should she wait, gather more evidence, and strike when they least expected it? Before she could decide, Ryan turned his head and caught her eye. His expression shifted instantly, from relaxed to panicked, as he realized she had seen him. Emily followed his gaze and paled, her smile fading into a look of guilt. Jessica took a step closer, but before she could say a word, Ryan stood abruptly, knocking over his drink in the process. "Jess, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered. But Jessica wasn't listening. Her focus was on Emily, whose face betrayed a truth she wasn't ready to admit. "Explain," Jessica said coldly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. Instead, a man Jessica didn't recognize approached the table and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "We need to talk, Emily," he said, his voice low and serious. Jessica looked at the stranger, then back at her husband and best friend, her confusion deepening. What was going on here? The man's presence threw Jessica off balance. He was tall, with an air of authority that demanded attention, and his hand on Emily's shoulder wasn't just casual, it was firm, almost possessive. Emily flinched under his touch, her face going pale as if she had just seen a ghost. "Who are you?" Jessica demanded, her voice sharper now, cutting through the din of the bar. She wasn't about to let this man, whoever he was, sidetrack her from the confrontation she was owed. The man turned to Jessica, his eyes narrowing as if he were sizing her up. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice calm but with an edge that sent a chill down her spine. "And it seems we're both owed some answers." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Ethan shifted his gaze to Emily, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the booth. "You didn't tell her, did you?" he said, his tone accusatory. "Tell me what?" Jessica snapped, her patience wearing thin. She turned back to Ryan, whose face was now a mix of guilt and something else she couldn't quite place, fear. "Ryan?" Jessica pressed, her voice trembling now. "What is he talking about?" Ryan opened his mouth, but before he could answer, Ethan spoke again. "I think your husband and I have been seeing the same woman." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Jessica felt her knees weaken, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "What?" she whispered, barely able to process what she was hearing. Ethan nodded toward Emily, whose eyes were brimming with tears. "She's been lying to both of us," he said. "And I have proof." Jessica looked at Emily, her once best friend, and saw a stranger. How had she missed this? How had she not seen the cracks forming beneath the surface of their friendship? Emily finally found her voice, though it was shaky and faint. "Jessica, I didn't mean for this to happen," she began, but Ethan cut her off. "Didn't mean for what to happen?" he demanded. You didn't mean to string me along for months? Didn't mean to sneak around with him while telling me you were ready for something serious? Jessica's head spun. Months? How long had this been going on? Ryan stepped forward, his hands raised as if to placate her. Jess, please let me explain. But Jessica wasn't interested in his excuses. Don't, she said, her voice cold and hard. Not here, not now. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I think it's time everyone here saw the truth, he said, tapping the screen a few times before holding it out for Jessica to see. The images on the screen hit her like a punch to the gut. Photos of Emily and Ryan, together in places she recognized, places she had been with Ryan herself. A restaurant they had once celebrated their anniversary at. A park where they had taken long walks. Even their own home, in moments Jessica had assumed Ryan was working late. But it wasn't just the photos. There were texts too, long, intimate conversations between Emily and Ryan, filled with promises, secrets, and a depth of connection that made Jessica's stomach churn. She felt like she couldn't breathe, like the walls of the bar were closing in around her. Ethan, meanwhile, was watching her closely, as if gauging her reaction. You didn't deserve this, Ethan said quietly, his voice almost gentle now. Neither of us did. Jessica looked up at him, trying to steady herself, to regain some semblance of control. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's expression hardened. The truth, he said simply. And maybe a little justice. Jessica's gaze flicked back to Ryan, who looked like a man teetering on the edge of collapse. She had no idea what Ethan's plan was, but one thing was clear, this wasn't going to end here. Jessica stood frozen, the weight of Ethan's words and the damning evidence on his phone pressing down on her like a lead blanket. Ryan reached for her, desperation etched into his face, but she stepped back sharply, her movement decisive and filled with restrained fury. Don't touch me, she hissed, her voice trembling not with fear, but with rage. You've said enough by doing this. Ryan faltered, his hand dropping uselessly to his side. Emily, meanwhile, looked ready to crumble under the weight of the confrontation. But Jessica wasn't done, not by a long shot. Ethan's calm but focused demeanor cut through the chaos as he leaned closer to Jessica, speaking low enough that only she could hear. I have more than this, he said, holding up his phone again briefly. And if you're willing, I think we can make them regret every second of their betrayal. Jessica blinked, taken aback by his suggestion. What are you talking about? She asked cautiously, her anger giving way to suspicion. Ethan's eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind his calm facade. Revenge, he said plainly, his voice so steady it sent chills down her spine. But not the kind they'll see coming. For a moment, Jessica didn't respond. Revenge wasn't something she had ever considered before. She was the type to walk away, to let time do the work of healing her wounds. But this felt different. This wasn't just about her marriage. It was about the life she thought she had, the trust she had placed in two people who had ripped it all apart. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked, her tone wary but intrigued. Ethan glanced at Ryan and Emily, who were whispering to each other in hushed, frantic tones, oblivious to the private conversation happening just a few feet away. They think they've gotten away with this, he said, his voice low and purposeful. But they don't know what we know. They don't know we're working together now. Jessica's heart raced at the thought. It was dangerous, reckless even, but a part of her, a part she didn't know existed until now, wanted to see where this would go. She wanted them to feel the way she felt now, betrayed, blindsided, and utterly destroyed. And what do you get out of this? She asked, narrowing her eyes at Ethan. He gave her a small, humorless smile. Closure, he said simply. And maybe the satisfaction of knowing they'll think twice before doing this to anyone else. Jessica hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could trust Ethan. He was still a stranger, after all, but there was something about the conviction in his voice, the clarity in his gaze, that made her believe he wasn't just looking for revenge. He was looking for justice. Fine, she said finally, her voice steady. I'm in. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. Good, he said. Then here's what we're going to do. Before he could explain, Emily's voice cut through the tension like a knife. What are you two whispering about? She asked, her tone sharp and defensive. Jessica turned to her former best friend, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, nothing, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Just catching up with a new friend. Emily's eyes darted nervously between Jessica and Ethan, but before she could say anything else, Jessica turned back to Ethan. Let's go, she said, grabbing her purse. I think we've seen enough for one night. Ethan followed her without hesitation, leaving Ryan and Emily behind in stunned silence. As they walked out of the bar and into the cool night air, Jessica felt a strange sense of empowerment. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time that night, she felt like she was back in control. Ethan stopped beside her, his hands in his pockets as he glanced over at her. You're not going to regret this, he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. Jessica looked at him, her jaw set and her eyes steely. They will, she said. And with that they walked into the night, leaving betrayal and broken promises in their wake, and planning the beginning of their revenge. Jessica and Ethan sat in a dimly lit diner a few blocks away from the bar. The faint hum of fluorescent lights and the clink of utensils against plates filled the space, but Jessica barely noticed. Her mind raced, still replaying the images, the lies, the betrayal that had unraveled her world in a matter of minutes. Ethan slid his phone across the table, snapping her back to the present. Before we move forward, you need to see this, he said, his voice low but steady. Jessica hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. The picture Ethan had shown her earlier flashed in her mind, a woman she didn't recognize but whose presence seemed significant. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the phone and began scrolling. The images hit her like a freight train. Ryan and Emily were only part of the story. There were more photos, dozens of them, of Ryan with another woman. She was younger, strikingly beautiful, and always smiling in his presence. The timestamps told a damning story. These weren't isolated moments. They spanned months, overlapping with the affair he'd had with Emily. Jessica's stomach churned. Who is she? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Her name's Lila, Ethan said, his expression grim. She's connected to me too. Jessica's eyes snapped up to meet his. Connected how? Ethan sighed, leaning back in the booth as if the weight of the confession was too much to carry. She's my sister, he said. My little sister. The revelation hit Jessica like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't process what she just heard. Her husband hadn't just betrayed her with her best friend, he'd also been involved with the sister of the man sitting across from her. You're telling me Ryan was seeing your sister too? She asked, her voice rising with disbelief. Ethan nodded. She had no idea about Emily, or about you. He fed her the same lies, made her think she was the only one. When I started piecing it together, she didn't believe me at first. But then I found the messages, the pictures. She was devastated. Jessica clenched her fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. She felt the anger boiling inside her, threatening to spill over. So what now? She asked, her voice shaking with rage. Do we just confront him? Expose him? What's the plan? Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Confronting them outright won't do anything. They'll deny it, twist it, make themselves the victims. No, if we're going to do this, we need to be smarter. Jessica arched an eyebrow. Smarter how? Ethan smirked, though there was no humor in it. We dismantle their lives piece by piece, the way they dismantled ours. But first we need leverage, something they can't ignore or explain away. Jessica's curiosity piqued despite herself. Leverage? Like what? Ethan tapped his phone, pulling up another series of messages. Ryan's been sloppy, he said, scrolling through the texts. He's left a trail. And not just with Lila and Emily, there's more. Money transfers, secret meetings, even a few work-related scandals he's managed to cover up. Jessica blinked, stunned. How do you even have all this? Ethan shrugged. Let's just say I have connections. When Lila finally let me see her phone, it opened a door. Ryan's not as careful as he thinks he is. Jessica leaned back in her seat, processing everything. She had walked into that bar expecting a simple confrontation, a messy but straightforward end to her marriage. Now, she was staring at something far more complex, and far more sinister. So what's the plan? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Ethan's expression darkened. We start with Emily, he said. She's the weakest link. She's terrified of you already, and I'd bet she'd crack under pressure. If we push her just enough, she might give us exactly what we need. Jessica felt a flicker of satisfaction at the thought. Emily had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and now she would pay the price. And after that? She asked. Ethan's lips curled into a dangerous smile. After that, we go after Ryan. And when we're done, he won't have anything left. Jessica nodded, the pieces of the plan falling into place in her mind. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt something other than pain. She felt power. Let's do it, she said, her voice filled with resolve. Ethan raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To justice, he said. Jessica smirked, clinking her water glass against his. To revenge. Jessica woke the next morning with a strange mixture of clarity and dread. The events of the night before played over and over in her mind, but now there was a new layer to it all, purpose. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman with a plan. Ethan had texted her early, asking if she was ready for the first step. She replied with a simple yes. They agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, neutral ground, far from prying eyes. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she approached, giving her a small nod. Morning, he said, gesturing for her to sit. Jessica slid into the chair across from him. Morning. What's the play? Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. We start with Emily, he said, pulling out a small notebook. She's emotional, unstable, and scared. If we can push her, she might spill something we can use against Ryan. Jessica frowned. Emily isn't stupid. She knows I'm furious. Why would she talk to me? Ethan smirked. Because she'll think you're willing to forgive her. Jessica blinked. Forgive her? Are you kidding? Not really, Ethan said, shrugging. You don't have to actually forgive her, but you need to make her believe you're considering it. She'll open up if she thinks you're looking for closure or trying to understand. Jessica hesitated, the idea leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Emily had always craved validation, even when they were friends. If Jessica played her cards right, Emily's guilt might make her vulnerable. Fine, Jessica said. But what exactly am I supposed to get out of her? Ethan opened his notebook, flipping to a page filled with scribbled notes. I've been looking into Ryan's finances, he said. There's money missing, large amounts that don't match up with his salary or your joint expenses. I think he's hiding something, and Emily might know where. Jessica's stomach turned at the thought. She'd always trusted Ryan to handle their finances. Now she wondered what else he'd been keeping from her. Okay, she said, her resolve hardening. I'll talk to her. But if she doesn't crack. She will, Ethan interrupted. Trust me. Jessica wasn't sure she trusted anyone at this point, but she nodded anyway. Where do I start? Ethan handed her a burner phone. Call her. Tell her you want to meet. Somewhere public but quiet. Let her think you're ready to make peace. Jessica stared at the phone, the weight of the task settling heavily on her shoulders. And if she doesn't agree to meet? She will, Ethan said confidently. She's too scared not to. Jessica took a deep breath and dialed Emily's number. It rang twice before Emily's shaky voice answered. Jessica? It's me, Jessica said, keeping her tone calm. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the other end. Jess, I don't think that's a good idea. Jessica tightened her grip on the phone. I'm not looking for a fight, Emily. I just need answers. I need to understand why this happened. Another pause, then a heavy sigh. Okay, Emily said finally. Where? Jessica glanced at Ethan, who mouthed. The park. The park near the old library, Jessica said. In an hour. Okay, Emily said again, her voice barely above a whisper. When the call ended, Jessica handed the phone back to Ethan. She's coming. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. Good. Now comes the hard part. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had no idea what Emily would say or how this meeting would go, but one thing was certain. It was time to start unraveling the lies. Jessica sat on a weathered park bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The crisp air carried the faint scent of pine, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed by the confrontation ahead. Across from her, Ethan sat in his car, parked discreetly at the edge of the lot. He had insisted on staying close, just in case Emily's guilt turned into something unexpected, or worse, uncooperative. Jessica glanced toward him briefly, his figure a steady reminder of her newfound ally in this tangled mess. The crunch of gravel under hurried footsteps pulled her attention back to the path. Emily was approaching, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for a storm. Her face was pale, her usual confidence replaced by an unmistakable look of unease. Jessica, Emily said softly, stopping a few feet away. Her voice wavered, a mixture of guilt and apprehension. Jessica gestured toward the bench. Sit, she said simply. Emily hesitated before lowering herself onto the far end of the bench, putting as much space between them as possible. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, oppressive, but Jessica knew she needed to let it linger, let Emily squirm under the weight of her own conscience. Finally, Emily broke the silence. I'm so sorry, Jess, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jessica turned to face her, her eyes cold and unyielding. Didn't mean for what to happen, Emily? You didn't mean to sleep with my husband? You didn't mean to destroy our friendship? Or you didn't mean for me to find out? Emily flinched at the sharpness in Jessica's tone, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. Jessica laughed bitterly, the sound harsh against the quiet of the park. Well, congratulations. You failed miserably. Emily looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. Ryan, he said you two were having problems. He made it sound like your marriage was already over. Jessica's jaw tightened. And you believed him? Without even talking to me? Without even considering what it would do to me? Emily's tears spilled over, and she shook her head. I don't know what I was thinking. I was stupid, Jess. I let him manipulate me. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Manipulate you? Is that what you're going with? Because from where I'm standing, you were more than willing. Emily's sobs grew louder, but Jessica didn't soften. She couldn't, not now, not after everything. Instead, she decided to press further. There's something I need to know, Jessica said, her tone firm. How long has this been going on? Emily hesitated, her tears slowing as she looked up at Jessica with wide, terrified eyes. It started about a year ago, she admitted quietly. At first, it was just, I don't know, flirting. Harmless, I thought. But then, her voice trailed off, and she looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. Jessica's stomach churned. A year. For 12 months, her husband and her best friend had been lying to her face. And you expect me to believe it was just the two of you? Jessica asked, her voice sharp. That Ryan didn't have anyone else on the side? Emily's head snapped up, her eyes widening. What are you talking about? Jessica studied her carefully, searching for any hint of deceit. Lila, she said, watching for Emily's reaction. Who is she? Emily blinked, clearly caught off guard. Lila? I don't know. Who's Lila? Jessica narrowed her eyes. Either Emily was an incredible liar, or she truly had no idea. She's someone Ryan's been seeing. Someone who had no clue about you or me. Emily's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. Oh my God! She whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Jessica let the silence hang again, her mind racing. If Emily wasn't lying, it meant Ryan's betrayal ran even deeper than she'd imagined. He hadn't just destroyed their marriage, he'd been weaving an intricate web of deceit, pulling multiple women into his orbit without a second thought. Does he have anything to hide? Jessica asked suddenly, her tone sharper now. Anything big, money, secrets, things he's tried to keep from me? Emily hesitated, biting her lip. I don't know, she said cautiously. But there was something he mentioned once. Something about a deal at work that wasn't exactly legal. He said it would help us, help him. But I didn't ask too many questions. Jessica's pulse quickened. A shady deal? If there was truth to this, it might be the leverage she and Ethan needed to unravel Ryan's world. Jess, please, Emily said, her voice cracking. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just tell me what you need. Jessica studied her for a long moment, weighing her options. Emily was fragile, desperate, and guilty, and Jessica planned to use every ounce of it to her advantage. Fine, Jessica said finally. You want to make this right? Then you're going to help me bring him down. Jessica's words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Emily sat frozen, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief and apprehension. Bring him down? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Jessica leaned in closer, her eyes locking onto Emily's with unrelenting intensity. You heard me, she said, her tone icy but resolute. Ryan doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. Neither of you do. But if you want any chance at redemption, you'll help me expose him for the liar he is. Emily's hands trembled in her lap as she processed Jessica's demand. What do you want me to do? She asked hesitantly, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. Jessica glanced over her shoulder toward Ethan's car. He was still there, watching, a silent presence in the background. She turned back to Emily, her mind racing. I want everything you know about him, Jessica said firmly. Every lie he's told, every secret he's kept, every shady deal he's been a part of. If there's anything that could ruin him, I need to know about it. Emily hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. Jess, I don't know that much. He didn't tell me everything. But there were things I overheard. Things he said when he thought I wasn't listening. Like what? Jessica pressed, her patience wearing thin. Emily took a shaky breath, her eyes darting around the park as if she feared someone might overhear. There was a phone call, she said finally. A few months ago. He was talking to someone about money, large amounts of it. He mentioned offshore accounts, and something about moving funds without triggering any red flags. Jessica's stomach twisted. Offshore accounts? This was bigger than she had anticipated. Did he say who he was talking to? Emily shook her head. No. He was careful not to use any names. But I remember him saying something about a deadline, about needing to act fast before someone noticed. Jessica's mind whirred with possibilities. If Ryan was involved in something illegal, it could explain the missing money Ethan had mentioned. It could also be the key to taking him down. Anything else? Jessica asked, her voice sharper now. Emily hesitated again, her hands wringing nervously. There's a safe, she said quietly. In your house. Ryan kept it hidden, but he once let it slip that it's where he keeps all his important documents. Jessica's pulse quickened. A safe. She had lived in that house for years, shared a life with Ryan, and she'd never known about a safe. What else had he been hiding? Do you know the combination? Jessica asked, her voice urgent. Emily shook her head. No. But I've seen him open it once. It's behind the bookshelf in your study. Jessica filed the information away, her mind already forming a plan. "You've done enough for now," she said, standing abruptly. "But if I call you, you'd better answer. I'm not done with you yet." Emily looked up at her, tears brimming in her eyes. "Jess, I really am sorry. I never wanted it to come to this." Jessica stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Emily," she said coldly. "But maybe helping me will." Without another word, Jessica turned and walked away, her heart pounding as she made her way back to Ethan's car. He rolled down the window as she approached, his sharp eyes scanning her face for answers. "Well?" he asked. Jessica slid into the passenger seat, her jaw set with determination. "She gave me enough to work with," she said. "There's a safe in my house. Ryan's been hiding documents, maybe even proof of whatever illegal deal he's been a part of." Ethan's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "That's a start," he said. "But if we're going after Ryan, we need more than documents. We need undeniable proof. Something that ties him to everything." Jessica nodded, her mind already racing. "Then we'll find it," she said. "No matter what it takes." Ethan's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous kind of excitement. "That's the spirit," he said. "Now let's bring him down." As they drove away from the park, Jessica felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She didn't know what they would uncover in Ryan's secret life, but one thing was certain: the first domino had fallen, and there was no turning back. Jessica's hands trembled as she turned the key in the front door of her house, the house she had once considered her sanctuary. Now, it felt like an elaborate stage for Ryan's lies, with secrets lurking in every shadow. Ethan had dropped her off a block away, insisting he remain out of sight for now. This step, he had said, was hers alone. The house was eerily quiet, the absence of Ryan's presence almost mocking. She set her bag down and made her way to the study, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. As she entered the room, her eyes immediately landed on the tall bookshelf Ethan had described. Behind it, according to Emily, lay the safe, and, potentially, the answers she needed. Jessica ran her fingers along the edge of the bookshelf, searching for a way to move it. It was heavier than it looked, bolted to the wall in some places, but as she pressed her hand against the side, she felt a faint click. A hidden latch. Of course, Ryan would make it subtle. She pushed the latch, and the bookshelf creaked forward just enough to reveal a small steel safe embedded in the wall. Her breath caught. Emily hadn't been lying. But now came the real challenge: opening it. Jessica stared at the keypad, her mind racing. She didn't know the combination, but she wasn't completely in the dark. Ryan had always been sentimental, predictable, even. Their wedding anniversary? His birth date? The date they bought the house? She decided to start with the most obvious choice: their anniversary. Her fingers hovered over the keypad as she punched in the date. October 12, 15. A loud beep echoed in the room. Access denied? She gritted her teeth and tried his birthdate next, March 22, 85. Another beep. Denied again. Jessica's frustration mounted. What else would he use? She paced the room, replaying every significant moment in their lives together. Then it hit her: Ryan's father. He had always idolized his late father, often using the man's birthday as a code for various accounts. Her fingers moved quickly this time, July 4, 54. The safe clicked. Jessica's heart pounded as she pulled the door open, revealing a stack of documents, a few small boxes, and a flash drive. She grabbed everything, stuffing it into a bag with shaking hands. But before she could close the safe, something caught her eye: a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the stack of documents. She unfolded it carefully, her breath hitching as she read the words written in Ryan's handwriting. Offshore accounts, Cayman number 1, Dubai number 2. Emily knows the fallback plan. Jessica's blood ran cold. Fallback plan? What was he planning, and how deep did Emily's involvement go? She folded the paper and shoved it into her bag, her mind racing. It was clear that Ryan wasn't just cheating, he was orchestrating something far more dangerous. Suddenly, the sound of a car door slamming outside jolted her from her thoughts. Panic surged through her, as she quickly shut the safe and pushed the bookshelf back into place. She grabbed her bag and darted to the window, peeking through the curtains. Ryan was home. Jessica's pulse quickened. He wasn't supposed to be back yet. She had planned for hours, not minutes, to go through the contents of the safe. Footsteps approached the front door, and Jessica knew she had only seconds to act. She slipped out of the study, ducking into the laundry room just as the door opened. Ryan's voice echoed through the house as he muttered something to himself. Jessica held her breath, clutching the bag tightly against her chest. Her heart hammered as she listened to his movements, the sound of his shoes on the hardwood floor growing louder as he moved through the house. She prayed he wouldn't notice anything out of place. After what felt like an eternity, his footsteps retreated toward the kitchen, and the sound of the refrigerator opening filled the silence. It was her chance. Jessica slipped out of the laundry room and moved toward the back door as quietly as possible. Every creak of the floorboards made her wince, but she didn't stop. Finally, she reached the door and stepped outside, closing it softly behind her. The cool air hit her like a splash of water, and she let out a shaky breath. She hurried down the street, clutching the bag tightly, until she spotted Ethan's car waiting at the corner. She slid into the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she set the bag on her lap. "You got it?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Jessica nodded, too shaken to speak. Ethan's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to her face. "Let's get out of here," he said, pulling away from the curb. As they drove, Jessica opened the bag and began sorting through its contents. The documents were dense, filled with financial jargon she barely understood, but the flash drive caught her attention. "What's on this?" she asked, holding it up. Ethan glanced at it briefly. "We'll find out soon enough," he said. Jessica stared at the drive, her gut telling her it held the key to everything. But as she looked out the window, watching the city blur past, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Ethan's car pulled into the parking lot of a quiet motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, and that was exactly what they needed. Jessica clutched the bag tightly as they walked into the room, her heart still pounding from the near miss at the house. Ethan locked the door behind them and set up his laptop on the small table near the window. "Let's see what we've got," he said, motioning for Jessica to hand him the flash drive. Jessica hesitated, her mind racing. Whatever was on that drive could change everything. It could either bring Ryan down or complicate things even further. She swallowed hard and handed it over, her fingers brushing against Ethan's briefly. He plugged the drive into his laptop, the screen glowing as files began to load. Jessica leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the list of folders and documents that appeared. "Looks like financial records," Ethan muttered, opening the first folder. "Wire transfers, account numbers, transaction histories. Offshore accounts, just like you said." Jessica's stomach twisted as she stared at the numbers on the screen. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars shuffled between accounts in the Cayman Islands, Dubai, and other locations she couldn't even pronounce. This is money laundering," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded grimly. "And not just that. Look here." He clicked on another folder labeled Projects. Inside were contracts, proposals, and emails detailing Ryan's involvement in a major real estate development deal. But it wasn't just any deal, it was a scam. "This development project, it's fake," Ethan said, scrolling through the documents. "He's been selling shares to investors, promising massive returns, but there's no actual construction happening. It's a front to funnel money into those offshore accounts." Jessica's hands flew to her mouth. "He's conning people out of their life savings?" Ethan nodded. "And he's good at it. These contracts look airtight. He's probably been doing this for years without anyone catching on." Jessica felt sick. The man she had married wasn't just a cheater, he was a criminal. And she had been living with him, sharing her life with him, completely blind to the truth. But then Ethan opened one last folder, and everything changed. It was labeled leverage. Inside were photos, videos, and scanned documents, dirt on various people, including Emily. Jessica's breath caught as she recognized her former best friend in one of the videos, sitting across from Ryan at a cafe, tears streaming down her face. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. Ethan clicked on the video, and Ryan's voice filled the room. "You're in too deep, Emily," he was saying, his tone cold and calculated. "If this deal goes south, it's not just me who'll go down. I've got enough evidence to bury you too." Emily sobbed, shaking her head. "I didn't know it was illegal. You told me it was just business." Ryan leaned closer, his expression hard. "Doesn't matter. You're tied to it now. So you'll keep your mouth shut and do exactly what I say, or I'll make sure you take the fall for everything." Jessica's blood boiled as the video ended. "He's been blackmailing her," she said, her voice shaking with rage. Ethan nodded. "And not just her. Look." He scrolled through the folder, revealing more files, similar videos and emails involving other people, including business partners, clients, and even a local politician. Ryan had built an empire of corruption, fueled by manipulation and fear. Jessica sat back, her mind racing. "We have everything we need to destroy him," she said. Ethan closed the laptop, his expression serious. "This is enough to ruin his life. But we have to be careful. If we play this wrong, he could use his leverage to turn it all on us, or worse, disappear before we can expose him." Jessica's jaw tightened. "We'll do it carefully," she said. "But we're not stopping. He doesn't get to walk away from this." Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Then we start tonight. First, we secure this evidence. Then, we decide who to bring it to, someone who can make it stick." Jessica's mind was already spinning with possibilities. "We'll need to get Emily back on our side," she said. "She's scared, but she knows more than she's let on. And if we can turn her against him, it'll strengthen our case." Ethan hesitated. "You sure you can trust her?" "No," Jessica admitted. "But I can manipulate her the same way Ryan did. If she thinks cooperating with us will save her, she'll talk." Ethan smirked, impressed. "You're starting to think like him." Jessica's expression hardened. "No. I'm thinking like someone who's been pushed too far." As they packed up the evidence, Jessica felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks: power. Ryan had spent years building his web of lies, but now she was holding the scissors. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jessica and Ethan sat in the dim motel room, the weight of their plan hanging heavily in the air. The flash drive sat on the table between them, a ticking time bomb of evidence waiting to destroy Ryan's empire. But Jessica knew this wasn't just about justice anymore, it was personal. "I'll contact Emily," Jessica said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "If we can get her to admit everything, it'll solidify the case. She's terrified of him, she'll talk." Ethan nodded, but his jaw tightened. "Just be careful. Ryan's already playing everyone like pawns. He's ruthless, and if he finds out we're coming for him..." He let the sentence hang. Jessica met his eyes. "That's why we'll hit him where he doesn't expect it. We control the narrative now." They devised the plan carefully, laying out every detail. The evidence would be sent to authorities and journalists simultaneously, ensuring Ryan couldn't spin his way out. But the final step would be the most crucial: confronting Ryan and letting him know he was finished. The next evening, Jessica called Emily to meet her. The nervousness in Emily's voice was palpable, but she agreed to meet at Jessica's house. When she arrived, Jessica greeted her with a calm demeanor, masking the storm beneath the surface. "Thank you for coming," Jessica said, motioning for Emily to sit in the living room. Emily sat down, fidgeting nervously. "What's going on? Why did you want to meet here?" Jessica placed the recorder on the table between them. "I need you to tell me everything, Emily. From the beginning. Ryan's deals, the money laundering, the blackmail, Everything. This is your chance to come clean. Emily's face crumpled, and she began to cry. I didn't know how deep it went at first. He made me feel important, like I was helping him. But then he started threatening me. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't do what he said. Jessica's anger boiled over, but she kept her voice calm. And you let him. You let him destroy lives while you stayed silent. Emily broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, Jess. He said he'd ruin my family. Please, you have to believe me. Jessica leaned back, letting the recorder capture every word. This isn't about belief anymore, Emily. It's about facts. And we have all the evidence we need to make sure he pays for what he's done. Just as Emily was about to respond, the front door burst open. Jessica's heart stopped as Ryan stormed into the room, his face a mask of fury. Jess, he growled, his eyes darting between her and Emily. What the hell is going on? Jessica froze for only a second before standing her ground. We know everything, Ryan, she said, her voice calm but firm. The money laundering. The fake investments. The blackmail. It's over. Ryan laughed, a cold, humorless sound. You think you've got me figured out? You don't know the half of it. He stepped closer, towering over her, but Jessica didn't back down. The evidence is already out there, she said. Authorities, journalists, they're all getting it. You can't stop it. Ryan's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something Jessica couldn't place. It wasn't fear, it was satisfaction. That's where you're wrong, he said quietly. You see, Jess, you were never the only one watching me. I've been watching you too. Jessica's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, swiping to a video. He held it up for Jessica to see. Her stomach dropped. It was footage of her and Ethan in the motel, going through the flash drive. The camera angle was from outside the window, but their conversation was clear. Every word, every plan, they'd been recorded. I've known about you two from the start, Ryan said, his voice dripping with malice. Did you really think you were the only one who could play this game? Jessica's mind raced. How had he found them? When? She glanced at Emily, who looked equally shocked, her face pale as a sheet. Ryan smirked. And Ethan, you didn't think I knew about you? About Lila? He turned to Jessica. You should ask your little partner here how much of this was his idea. How much he's really been telling you. Jessica's eyes snapped to Ethan, who stood frozen in the doorway. What's he talking about? She demanded. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Ryan laughed again. Ethan's been trying to take me down for years, Jess. Not because of what I did to Lila, but because he's just like me. He wanted control. And when Lila got in the way, he used her, too. Jessica's head spun. Ethan, tell me that's not true. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and cold. He's lying. He's just trying to turn you against me. But Jessica wasn't sure anymore. She looked between the two men, her world unraveling even further. Had Ethan been playing her all along? Was this just another layer of betrayal? Ryan stepped back, a smug grin on his face. Good luck figuring out who to trust, Jess. But here's the thing, you're not the mastermind here. You're just another pawn. With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Jessica standing in the wreckage of her life. She turned to Ethan, her voice trembling with anger and doubt. Did you use me? She asked, her eyes blazing. Ethan hesitated, and in that moment, Jessica realized the truth. He didn't have to say anything. His silence was answer enough. Her heart shattered all over again, but this time, it hardened too. She had been betrayed from every angle, but she wasn't done yet. If she couldn't trust anyone else, she would do it alone. As she stared at the door Ryan had just walked through, her resolve solidified. The game wasn't over, it had only just begun.